Also in anatomy, we talk about the planes when we're specifically making a cut through an organ, for example. And we also talk about cavities in the body where different organs reside. So when we're talking about the planes, this is how we cut the body. One way that we can cut the body is through in a vertical plane down the middle so that we have right and left sides. So that is referred to as a sagittal section. So sagittal section would be where we cut the organ or the body into right and left halves. So when we talk about the brain, there's a right hemisphere and there's a left hemisphere. When we talk about the heart, there's a right ventricle and a left ventricle. When we talk about the lungs, there's right lobes of the lung, there's the right lung, and there's the left lung. So those are important, the sagittal. When we cut right down through the middle, sometimes it's referred to, if it's equally left and right, that is sometimes referred to as the mid-sagittal section. Or plane. Okay. Now we can also cut the body so that we are looking at the front and the back. So this is what is referred to as the frontal plane, kind of a weird plane, not used as much as the sagittal plane. It's also sometimes referred to as the coronal plane. So sometimes when we look at a section through the brain, it is cut here so that it's like the crown, but it is a frontal section. We can also do that with the heart, for example. That is an interesting section. We might also do that with, say, for example, the stomach. I can visualize that. So those would be what are referred to as the frontal section. So we cut from so that we have a front section and a back section, or anterior to posterior. Okay. So that is my frontal section. We could also talk about cutting our body in half. So that would be, sometimes that's referred to as a cross section through the body. So if I wanted to do a cross section through my, what would I be? What would I want to do a cross section through? Maybe my heart, right? So that I can look down into the chambers, or maybe a cross section through the brain, or a cross section, that's it, through the vertebral column would be showing me actually the structure of the spinal cord. So those would be transverse sections. So transverse section. So this separates inferior and superior. So the upper and the lower halves of the body. So maybe we'll put halves here. Halves, because this is where we cut it, so we get the halves. So those are the major ways that we cut the body into different sections in order to observe it. So let's look at the body cavities, the major body cavities. So we actually have a cranial cavity. So this is where the brain is located. We also have a spinal cavity, and that is where the spinal cord is housed. When we look at the spinal cavity, that is actually a dorsal cavity because it's dorsal to, say, for example, the abdominal or the thoracic cavity, which would be ventral. So we have then the thoracic cavity. And this is actually protected by the thoracic cage. So that is your sternum, that would be your ribs that wrap around and attach to the thoracic vertebrae. So that is a very protective structure that protects the organs, the heart and the lungs that are in the thoracic cavity. So this would be heart and lungs. And then we have the abdominal cavity. This is separated from the thoracic cavity by the diaphragm. It is not as protected, but we have muscles here that can protect the internal organs, including the digestive system. Most of the digestive system, like the liver and the pancreas and your stomach and your intestines, would be in the abdominal cavity. We also have the pelvic cavity. So this actually contains, like, say, for example, in females, the ovaries, the reproductive structures. In males, it would contain like the prostate gland and the seminal vesicles. So the abdominal cavity is primarily, for example, digestive organs. And then the pelvic cavity could be bladder, reproductive organs. These can sometimes be put together as in the abdominopelvic cavity. So they combine those two cavities together in some of the diagrams that you'll see when they talk about these cavities. These cavities that are in the front, right, would be anterior cavities. So we can talk about their relative position, say, for example, to the spinal cord and the spinal cavity.